Hi there, it's Nicole, and today I have a thank you card that features some fall leaves. This is a stamp set from the Simon Says Stamp STAMPtember release, as well as the mini thanks, which is where the thank you greeting is from. It is also from another STAMPtember stamp set, and all of those supplies are linked below the video on YouTube. To start my card, I'm using some Tim Holtz watercolor paper, and I have inked up one of the leaves using scattered straw and rusty hinge distress inks. And then I've spritzed them a couple of times from about 8 to 10 inches away using water in a mini mister. And then I'm simply pressing that on the watercolor paper, and I like to hold it there for a minute. You don't want to push too hard and have the ink squish out from around the stamp, but I like to hold it there for a minute and kind of let that water absorb into the watercolor paper. I'm going to do the same thing with this leaf here. I have inked this one up with Fired Brick and Wild Honey Distress inks. And then for the long fern-like looking leaf, I'm using Crushed Olive and Forest Moss Distress inks. Same technique for all of these. Just kind of gently press it on until you can see, with the clear stamps, you can see that you've got a good impression. You just want to make sure you don't push too hard and have that ink squish out. It will distort the shape of the leaves. And I love the two-tone leaves like this because it really gives a much more realistic look, especially as the ink dries. I'm stamping several of these smaller leaves here, and a couple of them I didn't like, but I like to do multiples. That way I end up with at least one or two good ones. I used multiple colors just from all of the other colors I used for the larger leaves for these smaller ones. Now once the leaves are dry, I'm going to take the sketchy or scribble leaf that coordinates from the same stamp set and stamp that directly over my initial stamping using the darkest of the two ink colors that I used. And I only did a couple of them there simply because the rest of the leaves were a little bit wet still, so I'm going to set those to the side to dry before I finish stamping those scribble leaf layers. And I'm going to take another sheet of watercolor paper that I have die cut using the stitched rectangle stackables dies from Lawn Fawn. I'm taking the small or the mini ink blending tool from Ranger and the Gathered Twigs Distress ink, and I masked off the area from the stitching line to the edge of the rectangle. That will leave me a nice white frame or mat all the way around the center design of my card. So I'll keep applying the Gathered Twigs Distress ink until I get the exact color I want. And once I have that, I am taking this awesome Impression Obsession wood grain background stamp. It's a very large 6x6 size, and I'll ink it up with the Gathered Twigs Distress ink so that I can create a tone-on-tone wood grain background. Now generally when I'm working with a large background stamp, I'll take my paper to the stamp, but that wasn't possible this time since I've masked off that outer edge on my die cut rectangle. So I'm making sure I press my stamp really well, and when I lift it up you can see I've ended up with an awesome wood grain background. This would look incredible in all kinds of different colors. I chose to go the more traditional route on this card simply because I was doing a fall themed card, but I could see this in any color. The rest of my leaf designs are dry now, so I'm taking the scribble leaf layer and stamping that with my darker ink on top of the watercolored background. And then I will take the coordinating craft dies and use a little post-it tape to tape them in place and run them through my Big Shot die cutting machine. So I'll pop those through. I like to get as many cut in one pass of the machine as possible. So I only have to go back now with the small die and cut one additional small leaf. I'm going to take this large script thanks from the Mini Thanks stamp set and ink it up with the Simon Says Stamp black ink. Make sure I get it good and inked up. I've kind of laid out my leaves on my wood grain background so I knew where I wanted to stamp my greeting. Simply move those out of the way real quick while I stamped that. And now I can play with my leaves and adhere them to my wood grain background just how I want them to go. So I want them to look a little bit like they're scattered about. So I have a group of them underneath my greeting, and then I'll have a couple of them kind of framing that top left corner. And once I have them exactly the way I want them, I'll make sure they're secured really well. And finally, I will go in and add some simple embellishment with these pretty pink posh sequins. I'm using the pumpkin, espresso, metallic gold, and mossy green sequins. So they perfectly match the colors I used for the leaves. I hope you've enjoyed this video showcasing stamps from the Simon Says Stamp STAMPtember release. For more information, please visit my blog. The supplies I've used are listed and linked below this video. Thanks for watching.